Good evening and welcome to City News. As Donald Trump continues to make threats against Canada's economy and sovereignty, the Premier of Ontario is in Washington this hour, hoping to iron out a truce. Mark McAllister is tracking Doug Ford's trip, and Mark, the Premier has just wrapped up a meeting with one of Trump's most influential officials.
Yes, Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick was in the meeting. There's been lots of back and forth with Premier Doug Ford and him in recent days over the airwaves on American networks, apparently on the phone as well, leading up to this meeting in person in Washington, along with some federal ministers as well. That is very important. It wasn't just Doug Ford. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne, and Canada's U.S. Ambassador Kirsten Hillman was a part of that as well. Much anticipated going into this one, what can actually be accomplished when having discussions about tariffs on Canada, about what was a surcharge on electricity to New York and Michigan and Minnesota as well. That was implemented at the beginning of the week. You have to remember, this has only been a few days of back and forth. It started with us 25% surcharges on electricity. That led to an increase on tariffs for aluminum and steel from Donald Trump. Then a phone call from Lutnick. That led to the suspension of those surcharges and then an invite to this meeting today. It's been a lot of back and forth going into this, again, right up until this meeting was supposed to start at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Lutnick on television saying Ford thought he'd be a big man, but he can't tackle Donald Trump. That was the setup for this meeting. Since then, Ford has come out of that meeting at the Department of Commerce building in Washington saying the temperature has been lowered, and here's what more he had to say about how it all came down.
We feel like the temperature's come down. I'm not commenting on their behalf. We also know we're an extremely important trading partner, I'd say top tier in the world to the United States, and how we can continue working together to support each other. And I know it's still going to be moving forward, and we'll get there, but there'll always be bumps in the road, but it was very, very productive.
So an interesting takeaway from Premier Doug Ford about that meeting is certainly very positive. The question is, what actually became of those discussions? We don't know exactly if there was any particular outcome specifically, other than there was a positive feeling from Ford coming out of that meeting. We do know that we're still waiting to hear from the federal ministers as well. They're making their way to the Canadian Embassy and will be available to the media in a short time. So we only have Doug Ford's word for it at this point. What more we can hear, we're not quite sure just yet. Cynthia.
And Mark, everything is so unpredictable and mercurial, really. It's changed back and forth. You have whiplash watching this. So what are the next steps?
Well, the next steps is to continue the discussions at this point. We do know that Ford, as he was walking away from the media, was asked about whether or not those electricity surcharges were back on the table. He wouldn't answer that question at this point. There is another meeting scheduled for next week. Whether that's in Washington or not, we're not quite sure yet, but that will continue the conversations. What becomes of those conversations, who knows? Trump earlier today was saying that he definitely is not backing down from tariffs, and ultimately the decision on what happens is up to U.S. President Donald Trump. So whatever happens from these meetings, it needs to be taken up the chain, and obviously we've got a new Prime Minister being sworn in tomorrow as well, so we'll see how far it goes.
All right, Mark, thank you. Thank you, Mark.